To welcome you to the CGC webinar. And before I get started, I just want to point out some benefits of the early career CGC membership. As you can see on the slide being presented, it's a small annual meeting organization, excellent for networking, is our CGC organization. It's a relatively new organization, just been around for the last 10 years or so. And for early career members, as a trainee, you could join for just $75. There's a lot of opportunity as a CGC member. Part of it is you could be part of workshops, publications. You could volunteer on different committees, like the Early Career Committee, which myself was part of. You also have access to a lot of educational resources that are not available to non-members. So it's actually a very good opportunity for especially folks in the cancer realm and clinical and research as well. So with that, let's start continuing. I'd like to offer a welcome. 1 second. Okay, so this seminar is digital networking for early career research and clinical professionals. All right, and I would like to welcome, so as this webinar is actually based on, there's a panelist, there are 3 panelists that will be introduced. Each panelist will offer a small presentation on the topic at hand, which is digital networking for early career research and clinical professionals. Then after the panelists' presentations, there are 3 presentations afterwards, we will have a small poll that's going to be presented to you. And I think there's going to be a QR code with that poll. Then we'll go over the poll, and then we'll go into question and answer at the end of all the presentations. Okay, so without further ado, our 3 panelists is Sarah. The first is Sarah Geraghty. She is actually in Dublin, Ireland. She's head of careers at the company, the Communications Clinic. And she's had a long career doing as a freelance writer, as well as marketing, not only tutoring, but working as a marketing professional. Then we have Mr. Dave Reid. He's an instructor in digital marketing and management, and he is actually in Barbados. He is an instructor at Barbados Community College. He's had approximately 30 years working in the field, working with different companies throughout the Caribbean, and he will also be presenting today. And finally, we have Tracy Costello, Dr. Tracy Costello. She's the Assistant Dean at the University of South Florida. She also is a lifetime coach, an educational coach, and will be given a presentation on the difference between traditional and digital marketing. So without further ado, I will lead it over to Sarah. I'll stop sharing my slides.
Rodney, thank you so much.
Yes.
I'm delighted to be here with you all from darkening Dublin, Ireland. And to begin, it's just to give a sense of what I do, and very simply, in my day-to-day work at the Communications Clinic, my colleagues and I help people at all stages of their careers to communicate better. In all of that work, whether it's a doctor preparing for their first job interview, it's an experienced forensic scientist going on radio to tackle misinformation, we support people to develop a plan and understand that you can't just wing it, that purpose and clarity are what make your message land. And that's what I want to talk about today, how early career scientists and clinicians can be intentional about their digital communication so that online networking becomes a tool for building meaningful relationships and to take the pressure off and understand that it doesn't have to be an overwhelming, possibly distracting numbers game. So I want to, for the next few minutes, help you to take control of how you're perceived online. And to begin with, I'd ask a simple question, and that is, what is networking? So maybe it's easier to begin with what it's not. that it is not about collecting as many contacts as possible. It's not, if this reassures anybody, about spamming people with connection requests or just chasing random opportunities. Good networking in person and online is intentional. It's about creating, maintaining, and nurturing genuine relationships with people who can support you, who can challenge you from time to time, and collaborate with you. The way I like to think of it is as building a web. So it's a web of relationships that actually matter and not just a long, intimidating list of names. So networking, put simply, works best when it has a purpose. So before anyone rushes to create a YouTube account or post on X, just ask yourself, why am I networking? Who do I want to be in conversation with? Who do I, excuse me, who do I want to be seen by? And what opportunities am I hoping to create? Because this is all about quality over quantity. I would argue quite often that it's better to have 5 meaningful, engaged professional relationships than 500 passive ones. That might mean finding ways to introduce yourself in person and online, or be introduced to people that you think might be interesting to know, that might be valuable to your career as it stands right now and as you look ahead into the future. I think quite often during conversations of this, of a client I had a few years ago who was phenomenally successful across several industries. And he said, really interestingly, you always need to be building the next network. In his experience, most people build one network early on in their career and then they stop. So by the time they reach the midpoint of their career, that network has lost all of its key links through moves or retirements, even deaths in his experience. And suddenly the safety net that I assumed I had through that network I built up isn't really there anymore. So if you learn now to network properly, it can be, needless to say, of enormous benefit throughout your career. But just remember that it's never a one-way operation. It runs on the same principle as all good relationships, reciprocity or give and take. You have to invest time and attention in order to create the kind of context where they're going to invest in you. So online, I think, Rodney, you outlined this really clearly. It might mean identifying key communities, professional societies, next, like niche research communities, even conference hashtags, and joining those conversations. But just remember that you should always know precisely why you're there. For these purposes, I was thinking of my own experience with networks, and the one that struck me consistently was Lung Cancer Europe, who are a long time client of mine. It's an organization that brings people together who are living with lung cancer and their families. And it acts as a platform for national advocacy groups across Europe. So it helps them to share knowledge, raise awareness, and ultimately influence policy across Europe. And I've delivered multiple workshops for them in Portugal, Croatia, the Netherlands. And what's so powerful about that network is its clarity of purpose. So every connection, every collaboration, every campaign, every new member who joins or who nominates themselves to join ties back to a single goal. What I was saying there, I hope I'm not going back on myself, but I was just talking about the reasons that scientists and clinicians would want to network online. And before you start doing that, it's to be really clear on why you're doing it. So is it that you want to increase the visibility of your research? Is it that you want to attract funding opportunities? Is it about your own career advancement? That's one, really obvious and helpful reason that you'd want to network online. That you want to demonstrate leadership beyond research outputs, for example. Just think about it. Think about why you want to do this and what you're looking to achieve from it. Because without clarity, and this happens a lot, I see examples of it every single day, your online presence can become scattered and it can become inconsistent. And you're left without a decision-making tool for where I post, how often I post, what type of content I post. And all of that is hard to fix. It's hard to go back on later in your career. So my advice is to get it right now. Okay. A really clear example of how you do that is from a client we worked with years and years ago who became very well known overnight for writing a book because they went on a very famous late night talk show in Ireland and they got requests from everywhere to talk about themselves, come on radio, come on TV, and they became overwhelmed really quickly. So they needed to come up with a decision-making tool for what they said yes to and what they said no to. And what they landed on was defining their brand. And what they decided they wanted to be seen as was thoughtful and an expert on contemporary Irish society. And that became their decision-making tool. So if an opportunity was going to enable them to be seen in that way, they said yes. If it wasn't, they said no. But you want to come up with a decision-making tool for yourselves. And my advice is to start now, get clear on your why. After you've defined your why, it's time to define your brand. So asking yourself, right, who am I as a scientist or clinician? Who needs to know about me and my work? And how do I act on that? The example I always think of is an Irishman who's Professor Luke O'Neill. He's a leading immunologist and he's become really famous here because he appears regularly on Irish TV and radio. He's written a few children's books. And although he's a world expert in his area of science, he's also developed and defined his brand as being someone who makes complex science accessible and engaging. And he's really warm and funny and uses loads of examples while he's doing it. That's his brand. So it's really important for you to define your own brand. And a simple way of kickstarting that thought process is to craft one singular sentence that captures the way you want to be perceived online. Use that line consistently across your profiles, and that's your decision-making tool when it comes to ensuring that what you're posting, sharing, and commenting on aligns with that identity, okay? Because your perception matters, and whether you like it or not, people are forming opinions and they're deciding who you are, whether you like it or not. So my advice is to take control of that before somebody else gets a chance to. I know Dave and Tracy are going to go into shortly now, and I stop speaking into the platform strategy side of things. So where do I go? But wherever you choose to go, wherever you choose to be seen, wherever you choose to network, the principle stays the same. You're not just there to broadcast, you're there to interact and comment thoughtfully. So every post or like or share reinforces that professional brand. So my final 3 takeaways are: know your why, build meaningful relationships, and be constantly aware that you're defining and consistently communicating your professional brand on and offline. Okay, so before your next post, connection request, or comment, or appearance at a conference, ask yourself, does this reflect who I am and what I want to be known for? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I appreciate it. A lot of great advice there. Let's move on to Dave. He's going to be covering on the type of platforms, social platforms that are available to you and the audience in which these platforms are set up for. Dave, thanks.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Rodney, for having me. And continue off from what Sarah would have mentioned, Sarah did say that you need to be intentional in what you're doing. And based on the fact of being intentional, you also have to consider your audience, who you want to reach. If it's a situation you want to do collaboration, who do you want to collaborate with? And so on. So the whole idea behind choosing your platforms, whether you're going to be doing online or in some cases, sometimes you also be doing offline, and choosing to go to places like conferences and so on. It is also it is important to understand which platforms have where your audience would normally be. And in a lot of cases, for professionals, a lot of professionals are normally on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is one platform that a lot of professionals normally use, but it's also there's also Facebook, there's also Instagram, and in some cases, some persons also use YouTube and Twitter. but it's important to be intentional, as Sarah would have said, intentional in building your brand. So being intentional, you have to decide what audience you want to go after. And based on that audience, and again, coming off of what Sarah would have said, your audience don't have to be hundreds of persons. It can just start to go off be 5 people or 10 people and building it from there. It's important to know where your audience are. That is a situation that the majority of your audience are found at seminars where you would normally go and visit these different seminars, if it's within your college or within another state. If that's where the majority of your audience is, well, then it's important to be there at these seminars and then interact with them there. However, if you have a situation where the majority of your audience is on LinkedIn, then that's where that you need to be in order to build your profile, to build your brand. Okay, and with these platforms, it is easy to interact. First of all, you go and choose the persons that you're looking for, you want to interact with, and then you begin to design what you want to communicate with your audience, knowing that whatever you put out there is being broadcast to a number of people. So keeping it as simple as possible, and then beginning to build. What you're looking for is that engagement. You're looking for people to come back, to engage with you, to interact with you, to reply or comment to what you're putting out there. Now, the good thing about social media platforms would be the fact that you can change at any point in time. If it's a situation where you have, there's a situation where you have persons not responding to your first set of postings, you can go back, reevaluate, and then repost again something different. You have to decide whether you're choosing to post weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, quarterly, whatever it is. Your main purpose there is, as Sarah would have said, is to interact, to engage with your audience. All right. As I said before, LinkedIn would normally have professionals. You find a lot of professionals there: doctors, lawyers, scientists, persons who normally within your field. Now, there are other platforms that I've seen other people also use, which would be Facebook and Instagram. Instagram is normally used by a lot of younger persons, which would be the millennials, and especially you will find those who are within the bracket of Gen Z, and these are persons between early 20s to teenagers, right? The millennials between 30s, sometimes maybe early 40s, a little bit younger. You'll find on Instagram. Facebook will normally have mature persons from age 55 and older. Again, is understanding where your audience are, and then designing or planning your communications based on your audience, because those are the persons who you want to reach. In many cases, a lot of people sometimes try to just be on every platform. No, you don't need to be on every platform. Choose the one that is most effective for you. Choose the one where your audience are, and based on understanding your audience as well. And this will also go back to your plan. Why are you want to do your networking, right? Why are you doing networking? And based on why will help you to choose which platform, basically understand, the audience you're looking for, and then choose the platform that you will need to go on. My recommendation in a situation like this is just choose one platform. Choose one social media platform, work from there, and begin to build your profile, your brand a little bit at a time. As I said, sometimes you might find that persons also interact a lot at conferences where you can meet face-to-face. Okay, that is good, but it's also great to also have an online presence as well, because sometimes you might not be able to connect. The person who you want to connect to might not have a lot of time face-to-face. So you might be able to connect with them on a long-term basis on social media like LinkedIn, as I mentioned before. Or you might want to collaborate with persons in another state, another country. You can do that very easily on social media. The most important thing is knowing your audience, understanding what they're interested in, understanding based on what you want to achieve, how to communicate that to your audience, and build it a little bit at a time where you interact with a small number of people, and then also on one platform, and then begin to gradually build from there. And as my takeaway would be, know your audience, understand what your audience are interested in, and build gradually. It's not a race. It's something that you build gradually. And because you want the maximum impact, and as Sarah said as well, you want quality. You want to put out quality communication, you want to put out their quality work, so people will recognize your worth and also the professionalism that you are about and so on. So that's where I end at this time.
So I want to start by thanking both of our other panelists. Oops, Rodney, did you want to invite me to jump in? Sorry, I was just going to jump in. I've done these so many times.
Give another quick introduction to you.
Oh, absolutely.
Basically, this is Tracy. She'll be discussing traditional versus networking, versus digital networking options that you could have. And once again, I just wanted to reiterate, if you have any questions, you could type it in the Q&A section below in your portal. All right, go ahead, Tracy. Thank you.
I am going to take the liberty of sharing because I created a little bit of graphics that I'd like for us to just have as kind of background. So taking the liberty there of sharing screen. So you should all see a couple of blobs on the screen. Yes. Anybody see graphic? Yes.
Yes, yeah, we see that.
Fantastic. All right, super. So I just really want to take everything that everybody said together and really kind of figure out and make sense of how we're going to knit this stuff together, because science is a global enterprise. I say this all the time, right? We have to balance our virtual digital presence, which we may have at varying levels, with that actual connection with people in those in-person environments. So when we're combining that digital and that in-person networking, right? We've talked about the importance of knowing and communicating our why, knowing why we want to connect with certain people, knowing why we are talking about certain topics, right? And really being clear on who we are and what we want to be known for. Absolutely. I can't stress all of that enough. I can't underline, bold, face, italics, right? We've discussed different platforms and how to market and brand your experiences. So thank you, Dave. Like, that's a fantastic way for us to have these opportunities to share our experience, right? So when we have a solid digital presence, that absolutely can support your in-person networking and vice versa, right? So if you're connecting with someone, maybe you're learning about a career path, so you're thinking about informational interviews, or you want to identify potential collaborations. Sometimes we're connecting, and while we're discussing, we're brainstorming and we're solving problems, right? So we're in that ideation. Sometimes we're actually presenting, right? And we are establishing our branding. We're giving a lecture, or we're presenting a poster at a conference, or we're teaching a class, or any other ways in which we communicate our experiences and our expertise. Sometimes we're connecting with lectures at their lectures or their posters, and we're, even that is establishing your branding, right? You're known for the things that you show up for. You're known for the things that you identify with and connect with. So if we're talking about from the digital side, right? Digitally, that might show up as commenting or liking or sharing somebody's post, writing your own post, right? Being active in the space that you choose to be active at the pacing that you choose to be active. I will say I'm a daily user of LinkedIn, love LinkedIn, right? If I have 5 minutes and I'm walking across my campus, I am on LinkedIn and I'm answering somebody's question or sharing somebody's post, or writing my own. lots of different ways in which we can, show and share, right? If we find individuals that we want to connect with, especially, digitally, right? We may meet and see people that we've never actually met or seen in person, right? And I actually can say I've never met any of these individuals on the panel and in today's session in person. It's all been virtual. And so we've had, except for maybe one. And so we have these opportunities and experiences to connect and grow our networks far beyond what we've had in the past. So maybe we find someone who has a career path that we want to emulate, or we want to learn something from them, or they have an expertise that we need for that collaborative project. We have a spider web of connections, and I'm so glad Sarah said that earlier, because I have a picture, right? This is my mind map of our connections, and there's lots of types of individuals that we could possibly be connected with. So while we were talking about that network in the beginning, right, as we're building this, we want to think about who we want to connect with and who might show up in one of these categories, but also be intentional about who we're adding from that broader perspective, right? We have this lots of different types of individuals we want to add in this network. Your network is yours. A long time ago, I added the potential future colleague and bosses button because I think that it's really critical we think about not just who we're connected to today, but who we're potentially going to interact with and who might be important. Because really, at the core, we never know who we connect with today that's going to be important in our career in the future, whether they help us get a role, whether they let us know about a role, whether they are the boss or the colleague, or, we never know what that could possibly look like. And so, I encourage you to connect versus follow. You certainly can stop cyberstalk, follow a bunch of people. You will get all of their posts and stuff. But connection is such a deeper opportunity to really have conversations, and if you're comfortable in that space, then yes, absolutely connect. There's plenty of people I follow that I'm not sure I would ever be brave enough to hit that connect button, but that's anyway. If you have the opportunity, absolutely customize your invitations. And then one of my favorite tips for this, right, is I always look at who's looking at me. And I find that really informative. And especially, now and where I'm at in my own particular career, I see a lot of early career scientists, researchers, clinicians, et cetera, who look, right. And generally speaking, I send the connection request because if they're not willing, or if they're, you know, and if they don't want to connect, then they said no, and that's fine, right? But if they were shy, if they looked and they were like, oh my gosh, this person has, and they're sharing jobs all the time, or they're sharing career advice, and that's really useful. I would rather they have the connection, right? Because then that brings them into that larger network of who I've connected to, and I defined my network long ago as a connector. So my network isn't about me. My network is, curated for everyone else. And so with this last thing, right? Like bringing it back home, right? Bringing it back to what Sarah started with and what Dave was underlining, right? You really do have to craft that why I'm here narrative. Think about, before you sit down to craft LinkedIn, or before you are thinking about what you're going to share, do a deep dive, do some deep thinking about the type of content you want to share, collect some basic information so it's easy to pull together first drafts and whatnot. But especially, let's say for LinkedIn, right? When you do that search, you're seeing their headline. It's a very short little elevator pitch. It's designed to catch somebody's attention so they open your profile. What do you want to say there? Like, how do you want that to communicate who you are? There's so many profiles out there that I see, and LinkedIn does this because it thinks it's helping us, but it takes the first job that you enter and it puts that as your headline, which is useful for a minute, right? It's a placeholder. But, go beyond that and think about, what's your elevator pitch, or what's your 5-word tagline? And I'll share mine. Well, mine used to be. I'm Tracy Costello, and I facilitate career growth for postdocs. Now certainly that's also grad students, also early career, also mid-career. Like there's so much more to it now. But it was short, it was quick, and if someone had interest in that, they would punch the button and see the rest of the profile or dig into any of the other things that I had connected with. It was YouTube or websites or my list of my papers, right? All of the types of things that we could possibly connect in I like LinkedIn for that. That's one of the reasons, because it collects so much information all in one place. But when someone lands in that profile, right, and whatever that profile is, there's always a spot where you can have a narrative conversation with them. So I encourage first person writing for the LinkedIn About section, for example. Treat it like your elevator pitch, right? Like, how would you answer, tell me about yourself? So you create that compelling introduction that goes really beyond your name and your title, really what you care about, and ways that sparks conversation. And hopefully with all of that, I'm hoping we can dive into some questions, but at the end of the day, you really are your brand. So I want you to share things. I want you to connect with people. I want you to be writing and establishing, know what you want to be saying so that when you're saying it, you know, it's not that you feel like you have to answer all of the questions that are coming at you, but you answer the questions that are really, truly most important. Join groups, connect with people. Like there's all different kinds of ways to follow organizations and companies. And I'm going to pause right there because I could go on all day probably, but I want to make sure we have lots of time for questions from those who chose to join us today. Rodney? Hala?
Thank you very much, Tracy. I appreciate it. It was great advice once again and I'd like to thank all the panelists who've just given the presentations. Before we move on to the answering questions, Emily, could you put up the poll? There are 4 poll questions. And so we cannot vote, but I hope you're all seeing the poll questions. The first one, what are the reasons you usually network or market yourself? Second, how do you usually network or market yourself, be it traditional or digital? And what social platforms do you use? And finally, how often are you on social media? If you would take a few minutes to answer these poll questions quickly before we move on. And we have a few questions actually in the Q&A. I'm just lining them up now. So the first question is, do any panelists have insights on how to maneuver rebranding if you need to pivot to a new career or role? I think that's a great question. So basically, how to use social media trying to get a new career path going. So Emily, I guess you could tell us when is okay to proceed after the poll is done.
I'm happy to jump in on that question if.
I'm sorry?
I said I'm happy to jump in whenever.
Okay.
For that question, for maneuvering and rebranding.
Yeah. Let me see. Well, why don't we just start? I guess people are still doing the poll. They're running through the poll. Why don't we go ahead? If any of the panelists would like to address that first question, basically, how do you maneuver rebranding in order to get to a new career path or a new career role?
So as a coach, I'll say, one of the, I get this question a lot, right? And part of this is, understanding what you want and why you're going in that direction, or what it means to pivot and go into a new direction, right? Or if it's general, this isn't quite the right fit, and so I don't know quite what that looks like. I highly encourage connection. I highly encourage informational interviews, and go to career panels and those kinds of things, but talk with people to really figure out what that is. And then as you are, again, in that rebrand, right? Like if you've decided that that's your path and that's the move that you want to make, then you want to start learning so that you can then do some of what you learn, but also teach. So share what you're learning along the way. So if your shift was from clinical to, let's say, medical writing or something like that, and you're shifting and you're thinking, how am I doing this? Then do the activity, right? Like show that you're moving in this direction so that when your future, employers or your future colleagues are going to be seeing you, they're going to see you as already moving in that direction so that you're, really halfway there. And I think that that's a lot of the answer to a question like that. Like, I mean, if you want to do it, walk the walk, right? If you're really going to start to move in that direction, go in that direction. Volunteer. I mean, even volunteering gets you a ton of experience. I see Sarah nodding, so I'm sure you've got something.
No, Tracy, I do have something, but it's to reinforce everything you've said. I couldn't agree more. I was nodding along through both what yourself and Dave have been saying today. It's a really interesting one. And Tracy, I've heard a lot of those questions in a post-COVID world, in the careers role that I'm in specifically. Either people were forced out of their careers or the jobs that they had been in for quite a long time, or they took it as an opportunity to pivot and look at doing something new. And I think what was always helpful to people that I worked with, or even friends of mine that just ask for advice on these things, was to do an audit of sorts. So look at what my skill set is right now. What do I have? What do I have credible proof of? And what does the employer or the industry that I'm kind of interested in, what do they need? So, if it's a new set of qualifications, the obvious answer then is you got to go get those qualifications, right? But a lot of times, what really helped people was understanding that if they had proof that they were able to learn and adapt quickly, for example, that opened a lot of doors. There are very, very few areas or industries or employers who don't appreciate a good communicator or a team player or someone who's able to take initiative, for example. So don't write anything off. A lot of people will do themselves a disservice by saying, "Oh, but I don't have the years of experience Tracy has." And that's a fact. I can't add years of experience on that I don't have. But you probably have a ton of other stuff that you're just not thinking of, you know? And if you can go and persuade somebody, whether it's the interview panel or whether you are, as Tracy said, just thinking outside the box and going talking to people and saying, look, I'm kind of interested in this. What do you think? That you're able to go with a case for yourself, which is, I do this, this, and this, and I know you're probably going to need somebody who can communicate effectively. So what do you think? Okay. So identify what you have and what you need, but also just recognize that a lot of people just appreciate somebody who can adapt, who can learn, who can actually pivot, even when they say they can. But Tracy, I guess that goes back to what you've said, walk the walk, talk the talk.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of truth in that. You hit on two of the three things that I always talk about. So I always talk about know your skills, really do self deep dives, know your interests because they may or may not be different, may or may not completely overlap, right? Like you may want to leave some things behind and take on some new. And then what does the market, right? What does the employer want? And those three. So I thought I was pretty clever when I created a Venn diagram years ago with those three things. And then I discovered the concept of Ikigai, which if you go Google that, it's Ikigai. Not new. Nothing that I had thought I'd created was new. And so a funny story there, right? But thinking about, how do all those things sort of connect and how do you communicate that and how do you make those shifts and how do you just, I think this seems really interesting. Your role seems really interesting. Tell me more about that. Help me understand. And asking open-ended questions gets you a ton of information that you can filter against. But in that space, right, and I'm going to invite Dave to maybe tack onto this question, right? You have to think about, how you're starting to share that and present that and, and do that.
Yes, Tracy and Sarah, I agree wholeheartedly about what you all said. What I will share is my own personal experience because in the height of COVID in 2020, I was forced to pivot. I didn't have any choice. The company that I was working for decided to take the opportunity to just make a lot more redundant. And then a month later, I was given an opportunity to teach at the college part-time. So I had to then make that pivot. And during that period, I tried to get as much information as possible. I was on actually I use social media a lot, news LinkedIn a lot, to reach out to persons to begin to change my whole narrative on how I was beginning before to something that's new, connect with persons in all parts of the world and begin to get that my voice up there and try to get feedback and how to be able to now present myself as a tutor, as a teacher. Be able to, I spent a lot of time watching videos, doing a lot of research and so on to prepare myself for it. And as I say, the great thing about it was that because of social media, it helped me to make those links, to make those type of connections, and also to get the material that I needed to really begin to really make the pivot. Because I said it was in the beginning of COVID, which means face-to-face connections were zero. There was no face-to-face connections. There was hardly persons you could release and say, okay, can you help me with this? So basically, I was on my own. I was told to teach, and I was also teaching online as well, which I've never done before. So all those things I had to learn. And yes, it is sometimes daunting, but once you continue doing it, once you go after and recognize, hey, you know what, I can get this done. It is not beyond me. It's within my capacity to make the pivot. You can do it, and you have to support. As I said, there's a lot of resources, a lot of things out there online, and that's why social media are so fantastic for helping you even within doing a pivot or with any area that you're involved.
Thank you very much. That was a great answer to that question. Before we continue the question and answer period, let's go over the poll results real quick, because I think that will also add some interesting dynamics to the remainder of our session. So the first question, what are the reasons you usually network or market yourself? And 58% of the audience basically said professional connection collaboration, which is what I would expect from this audience, actually. I usually don't network is very low, which is great, and job search at 38%. So the next question, how do you usually market yourself? So as you can see, a combination of both is taken off between digital and traditional. Very few people do either one by itself. So the majority of the audience are taking care of both. And the other third, so which social media do you use most? And it's primarily the professional networking. Some social, some sharing, but mostly it's professional networking. And I guess I'll be part of that camp as well. I am not a huge social media person, but when I am on, it's mostly for professional reasons. How often do you use the preferred social media? So it's daily, weekly, monthly, and it seemed to be almost across the board, even amongst those three. And very few people really use social media. So I think that's very interesting. This group of young professionals are in the more or less in the middle of either doing a combination of both platforms, digital as well as traditional, and primarily for professional reasons. And I guess 39% use it weekly and 30% daily. So it is being used quite often. That's great. Let's go to another question. And backing up on that question, the last part of the poll talking about how frequent, we have one question that asks, how often should you follow up on the contacts within the social platform? So how often should you follow up with those contacts? anyone could answer the question.
I think Tracy or Dave has this. I'm on the fence about that one.
I have an answer. Dave, you want to tackle it first?
Just as often as possible, continue making those follow-ups, because the thing about it, you want to continue that engagement. You want to continue that engagement and keep persons going. The whole thing about being on social media is engagement. You want to have engagement, you want to continue that engagement. And that's what builds then those professional relationships. So as often as you can, that is my advice.
Can I just, before Tracy gets in?
Yeah, go ahead.
With the follow-up to Dave, it's just so I don't forget what Dave said there about the engagement. It kind of reminds me of why people tend to hate the word networking, because it conjures up an image of swirling around a room at 7:30 in the morning and handing out and picking up as many business cards as they possibly can, and then patting themselves on the back and saying, I did a great job there. But in my experience, very few people actually do anything with those business cards. All right. So they go back to their office, they put these business cards in their drawer, still patting themselves on the back, but there's no engagement, there's no connection. So nothing has happened as a result of that. So I think it's a really interesting point, Dave, that you're going back to, whether it's online or in person. It's the engagement and it's the meaningful connection. Otherwise, what are we all doing? Tracy.
So I'm going to split the difference, because I don't think it's an always, and I don't think it's a never. I think and not that you're advocating for never, but you gave the never example. So I'm going to split the difference. Yes, I know you're not advocating for never. I think the answer is it depends. So it depends on who you're talking to. It depends on who you're connecting with. There are some individuals that you're connecting with that absolutely deserve and need and require more connection, more conversations, especially if they're a deeper relationship, right? And you're building a relationship. So I don't like to talk about networking. I like to talk about building relationships. So I'll throw that in here since it seems to fit. But also to say that there's a study on networking and how people react to that word networking and what they think. And they very frequently would identify words like wash and soap, like networking is dirty, as opposed to others who are in the more positive frame and they see wish, and I can't remember what the other one is, but you see where the difference is between wash and wish, right? It's a letter, but also so much context, right? In that study. So, it really depends on who you're connecting with. What I like about LinkedIn in particular is it helps you with connections. So if you have someone that you've lightly connected with at a conference, and maybe it's been a while, right? Chances are they're going to have a birthday or some kind of announcement, like it's their annual year of their, like, hey, I have another year in my role of whatever. LinkedIn will remind you of some of those kinds of things periodically, in which case you can restart the conversation, right? It's never too late to restart a conversation when you've had a connection with someone. So if you have that stack of business cards, I have stacks of business cards from many, many, many years ago, and I'm sure they've gotten thrown out at some point, but I do get them at conferences. I prefer in the moment, while I'm sitting there in a break, I will enter all of those into my LinkedIn and I will send a flurry of invitations, and I will certainly open that up and welcome everyone who's on the call today to connect with me if you want to, right? Like, it's a choice. If I have something that's useful, then fantastic. If not, and I'm not a valued connection, then I'm not, and that's okay too, right? Like, we are all making decisions about how we build our own spider webs, right? And so it's really thinking about, when do you need to, right? And I will just say, you want to have these little relationships built way before you need them in a job, or a, job search or career exploration situation, because they will not hesitate to offer up referrals, et cetera, if you've built that relationship. But if they have just met you, they may not be willing to invest their social capital in helping you move forward. And it's not that you won't have that relationship later, but Build it before you need it. Your network is so valuable and so worth it. So if you're on the fence, for those of you who answered in those ways, go ahead and try it, right? You don't have to have an expert level profile with all the things in it, right? Start to connect with the people who you think are important. And that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy, you know, I always think in my mind when you make a point like that or somebody else is talking about it like that, you know, we probably all have a friend or a family member, and you know when you see their name come up on your phone that they're ringing to ask for something. You know, you don't want to be that person in a network because people, they know what it's about. And there's a story told of a politician, a very senior politician, who was known by all of his staffers as making sure that there was a very informal hi, how are you conversation logged at least 3 times before his office called another senior politician's office to ask for something. So, you know, a happy holidays or you know, I know you were celebrating something this weekend, but that stuff had to be logged. It had to be done before an ask was put in. Otherwise, just as Tracy was saying, that relationship is being damaged. It's being chipped away at, because that's essentially what we're talking about here. Like Tracy said, it's creating meaningful connections and developing strong relationships. It's not just, you know, collecting names or connections and then moving on with your life or saying, that's cool, I connected with Rodney Wilshire, I'm going to call him and see if there's any jobs going.
Well, great. Thanks a lot, everyone. I didn't want to cut this wonderful conversation off, but unfortunately, we only have a couple of minutes left. But I would like to thank all of the panelists for joining in invigorating conversation and discussion.